Undercover boss gets toast, learns she's $400 short on rent every month. Golden Fork, a small branch of the new Dawn Calf chain, sat tucked into the corner of West Elm Street, where old buildings pressed tightly against one another, and rent was climbing like the midday sun in July. That morning, the air inside smelled of baked butter and rich roasted coffee. The bar stools were nearly full. Regulars sipped from paper cups while tapping on laptops. Delivery workers picked up to-go orders. And the espresso machine hummed steadily without pause. Michael Foster, 50 years old, founder of the New Dawn Calf chain, sat at the corner of the bar wearing a gray baseball cap and an old khaki jacket. No one recognized him. And that was exactly how he wanted it. He poured milk into his black coffee, gently stirring with a silver spoon. A slice of cinnamon-buttered toast sat neatly on the plate in front of him, still steaming. A normal morning. Until a voice cut through the calm, not a shout, but a truth whispered, "If I just had another $400, I could cover rent this month." The words came from behind the counter, so soft they were almost lost beneath the sound of oil sizzling in the kitchen. But Michael heard it, and he froze, spoon suspended in midair as if someone had just touched a nameless nerve inside him. The voice belonged to Carla, a brown-haired girl with Curl's apron hanging off one shoulder, calling out orders to the kitchen, not realizing her voice was loud enough to be overheard. Her frame was slim, her steps brisk, but her movements carried a certain clumsiness, as if her body had learned to move quickly while constantly conserving energy. Michael watched her closely, but stayed silent. Part of him wanted to believe he'd misheard. But her eyes, when she bent down to grab a clean plate, confirmed otherwise. They were the eyes of someone used to living with less and still pretending to be fine. A middle-aged customer nearby murmured absent-mindedly, "Rent in this area is insane. Goes up by nearly $200 every year." The remark wasn't directed at anyone, but it fell into the silence left behind by the earlier whisper. And Michael, still not touching his toast, felt a tightness in his stomach, not from hunger. Carla passed by, gently setting the coffee pot down on Michael's table. "Would you like a refill, sir?" Michael nodded, offering a smile. But his eyes stayed fixed on her hand, trembling ever so slightly. The old watch on her wrist was scratched. Her wrist was faintly bruised, as if it had been struck against the edge of a counter. He wanted to ask, but he didn't, because he knew to understand a system you can't interrupt it. You have to move with it. A regular, an elderly man by the window, folded his newspaper and mumbled, "This place strange, how it's kept a girl like her." Most of the young ones quit halfway through. Another sentence. No one was talking to him, but Michael caught every fragment. And those fragments were beginning to form a shape. He pulled out a small notebook from his pocket and jotted down a few lines. But his hand paused when something else caught his attention. A young customer had just left a tip at the edge of the table. Carla reached to pick it up when Bryce, the morning shift lead, stepped in, grabbed the bill, stuffed it into the communal tip jar, and barked, "No personal tips. Branch policy." Carla gave a faint smile, said nothing. But she lifted her eyes just for a second and looked at Bryce as if she wanted to say something but couldn't. Michael saw it. And any viewer, if they'd been sitting beside him in that moment, would have felt the same. Like they were walking with him, witnessing a truth hidden behind polite smiles and soft jazz floating through the calf. The girl who just said she was $400 short on rent was now being forbidden from accepting a personal tip. And the team leader, the one who was supposed to support her, was the one controlling every dollar of kindness from a customer. Michael didn't yet know the full story. But he'd seen broken systems before, and they always started with small details like this. The atmosphere in the calf didn't seem to change. But inside Michael, something had already begun. A need he couldn't ignore. A need to know and to fix. Golden Fork, a modest but always packed branch of the New Dawn chain, sat at a street corner near the Southwest Metro station. From the outside, it looked like the kind of place you'd walk into every morning without thinking. Warm yellow lights, a chalkboard with the day's specials written by hand, and the scent of toasted bread mixed with freshly roasted coffee drifting gently onto the sidewalk. Inside, the morning rush repeated itself like clockwork. The clinking of glasses, the sound of the coffee grinder blended with voices shouting orders from the kitchen. Staff moved along familiar paths like streaks of color bleeding through a morning painting. Michael Foster, 50 years old, founder of the New Dawn chain, appeared at a table near the window. He wore a linen shirt, plain khaki pants, no laptop, no assistant. In his hand was a soft leather notebook and a cup of black coffee. This was the man who once signed multi-million-dollar deals with investors, but this morning he only wanted to understand one thing: why did this branch have such a high turnover rate? Despite decent sales, Carla, 25 years old, was one of the few full-time employees at the branch. She had worked here for nearly 10 months, always punctual, never complained. But no one in the system knew much about her aside from a few small facts. She lived in Northgate, a neighborhood where rent had increased nearly 20% in just 6 months. Each morning, she caught 2 buses to make it in on time, and she always smiled even though her eyes always looked sleep-deprived. Carla was thin with brown curly hair usually tied back. Her uniform fit, but the cuffs had begun to fray. Her hands always held tightly to her order notebook and a correction pen, as if she were always ready to apologize for mistakes not yet made. Travis, the morning shift supervisor, was around 35 years old. A former head chef, now transitioned to operations manager. Moody rarely spoke to customers, but always kept an eye on the security cameras and checked the tip distribution board every night. He controlled the shift schedule, break times, and the tip pool where all tips were collected and redistributed. Rosa, the Latin chef, was closest to Carla at the caf, but rarely spoke. Whenever Michael asked about daily operations, she would always dodge the question with, "I just handle the kitchen. I don't know much about shift stuff." Then small details began to reveal themselves like light piercing through frosted glass. A customer, an elderly woman in a cotton jacket, left a $5 tip specifically for Carla after finishing her pancakes. She said clearly, "For that sweet girl, okay, she looks tired today." Carla bowed slightly in thanks, but before she could pocket the bill, Travis walked up. He didn't raise his voice, just nodded toward the communal jar on the counter. "All tips go in there." Carla swallowed her thanks, dropped the bill into the shared jar, and turned away. Less than 30 minutes later, Michael saw Carla finish counting the tips from the jar, then quietly slip a $10 bill into the inside pocket of her shirt, glancing quickly toward the camera. The entire action lasted only 2 seconds, but for Michael, it was enough for him to close his notebook. He wasn't angry. He wasn't judgmental. But in his mind, a question began to echo clearly: why would a hardworking girl doing everything right have to sneak back a few dollars just to survive? And why had no one in the system noticed? Michael took a final sip of his coffee, then wrote a short line in his notebook: "There are actions that aren't wrong only because the system leaves no other choice." No one paid attention to him, but his eyes didn't leave Carla for even a moment. A calf began to reveal itself not through colors, but through tiny details: a stifled sigh, a glance at the clock before the shift ends, a trembling hand slipping money into a shirt pocket. And in those details, Michael started to see the problem wasn't with the tips. It was this: the cost of living had grown beyond the reach of those who created value every day. And no one spoke up, because everyone was just trying to survive. Around 10 a.m., the customer flow began to slow. Golden Fork was no longer bustling with orders being called. Only the soft clink of spoons against cups and gentle jazz from the ceiling speakers remained like the steady beat of a tired heart. Michael Foster sat at a table near the service counter. He held a cold cup of coffee, eyes silently observing the space. Everything operated exactly as the report said: on time, fully staffed, no customer complaints. But something deep beneath the surface was quietly offbeat. Carla, in her short break, quietly sank down beside the counter. One leg stretched out, the other folded to support her aching back. She didn't groan, didn't complain. She just lowered her head, looking at her shoes with worn-out soles, hands holding a cup of water long since emptied. Another server, a young man named Mason, walked by, leaned down, and whispered, "You haven't taken your break yet, still 20 minutes left in the shift." Carla gave a faint smile, her voice just loud enough for Michael, seated nearby, to hear. "If I take a break, I'll be 400 short again. Rent's now higher than food." Michael froze. That sentence wasn't a complaint. No bitterness. No cry for help. It was a statement like a survival formula she had silently repeated to herself every morning before stepping out the door. $400. Not a distant number, but through Carla's voice, it surfaced like an old scar. That sentence, only 7 words, was enough to pull Michael out of character. He was no longer just a CEO evaluating a branch. He was a man witnessing an employee within the very system he built, bargaining with life every single day. He opened his leather notebook and wrote a single line: "You can't call it success if a full-time worker still can't pay rent." Rosa, the head chef, passed by with a tray of fried eggs. She paused next to Michael's table and spoke softly, eyes not meeting his, gazing out the window. Carla once asked to switch to night shifts. "But Travis said, you're not flexible enough, don't need you." There, Michael tilted his head. "Not flexible enough," Rosa exhaled lightly, as if afraid someone might hear. "Carla takes evening English classes. If she switched shifts, she might have to drop the course." But she still asked to try. Travis refused. And since then, her shift schedule just got worse. Michael closed his notebook. In his mind, the puzzle pieces began falling into place like fragments of a once blurry picture. Across the caf, Travis was loudly talking to a group of new hires. "There's no room here for the weak. If you can't handle it, quit. Don't whine." The words dropped like nothing. No one reacted, because everyone was used to that tone. But Michael wasn't. He looked over at Carla. She was still working, balancing a tray of drinks, moving quickly between tables. Her shirt clung to the sweat on her back, but her smile stayed intact. The way she treated each customer carried the patience of someone who couldn't afford to lose anything else in a life already on edge. And what shook him the most wasn't the missing $400. It was the fact that she never asked anyone for help. That silence made Michael realize something far more urgent had been ignored: a system built to run smoothly but never once asked, "Is it humane?" The silence of people like Carla was the loudest emergency signal. Michael didn't get up right away. He remained seated watching, then wrote one more line in his notebook: "Silence isn't agreement. It's the sign of someone who's lost faith." From that moment on, every small action in the caf took on deeper meaning. Each avoided glance, each half-finished sentence, each time Travis looked at the camera, all raised one larger question: was everything he built truly serving the right people? Over at the cashier counter, Carla bent down to pick up a dropped receipt. Her head was slightly lowered, but Michael could see her eyes through the glass, and for the first time he recognized that look, the look of someone who had grown used to being told not to dream too big. And a part of him couldn't sit still anymore. Michael didn't immediately intervene. He knew rotten systems don't collapse with a single word. They must be dismantled layer by layer. Each puzzle piece, each tiny detail that no one else paid attention to. He returned to his seat, opened his small leather notebook like a regular caf guest, jotting down casual notes. But every question he asked, every time he struck up a conversation with a staff member, was no accident. A part-time server barely out of his teens, with acne still on his cheeks, approached Michael's table to collect the bill. Michael smiled, then asked, "How are tips shared here?" The young man hesitated, then lowered his voice evenly on paper. "But in reality, some of us never see our share. Each month I get maybe 20 or 30 bucks. Some days, nothing at all." Michael leaned in. "Did you ask?" "Yeah. But Travis said maybe customers didn't tip enough or the system didn't track it. No one really knows. Nobody dares ask too much." Another hour passed. Michael spoke with Abby, an employee who had just dropped out of school to work full-time. She whispered, eyes scanning the room before she answered, "If you don't please Travis, you only get assigned the dead shifts. Early Monday morning or midday Wednesday, the ones with no tips." And Carla Abby hesitated for a moment, then exhaled. She once asked to switch shifts so she could attend English classes. Got denied. Since then, she's only been working early mornings. It wears her down. Michael glanced at his watch. Nearly 11 a.m. The morning rush had passed. The space was thinning out, and he knew this was when the cracks in the system were most visible. From the counter, Carla had just finished running food. She returned quietly, opened a cabinet, and took out an envelope. Not a thank you letter. Not a tip either. Michael squinted slightly. It was a provisional pay stub. She unfolded it, skimmed quickly, then bit her lip. Her thumb clenched the edge of the paper as if trying to keep it from trembling. She walked into the back room where only a wooden chair and a few metal drawers stood. She sat down. From her shirt pocket, she pulled out a small fabric wallet. She opened it, took out 2 things a rent bill, and a strip of painkillers, just 2 pills left. She stared at the bill for a long time, as if recalculating. But then she folded it carefully, tucked it back in the wallet, and slid it deep into her pocket. The motion was slow, precise, as if it had become a monthly routine. Michael followed every movement. He didn't interrupt, didn't ask, but his gaze had changed. It was no longer the look of a man observing a branch. It was the look of a man who had just seen a deep crack in the very house he built. He wrote another line in his notebook: no one should have to choose between learning and a full meal. A clatter came from the kitchen. Rosa had dropped a spoon. Carla rushed over to help pick it up. They said nothing. But when Carla turned to leave, Michael noticed Rosa gently placed her hand on Carla's back, squeezing it just for a second, as if it carried all the words left unsaid. Then, Carla returned to the counter. Travis stepped over, glancing at the pay stub still exposed in the drawer. What's with the long face this month's better than the last one? Carla didn't reply. Travis scoffed, thinking of asking for a shift change again. She shook her head. Light as a leaf, but her eyes no longer lowered. Michael recorded that moment.
And right then, the audience, those following his journey from the start, let out a sigh alongside him.
Because they weren't just watching a story. They were seeing themselves, their friends, or their daughters in the eyes of a young woman folding a rent bill like it was a wound she wasn't allowed to show. Everything grew quieter, clearer. No need to raise voices. No dramatic moves. Just a look. One remaining pill in a wallet. And $400, the unthinkably high cost of a system once proud of being fair and humane. Michael stood up, walked toward the counter, but this time, not to observe. To begin a conversation that should have happened a long time ago. Michael placed his coffee cup on the counter. He stood, not rushing, not loud. Yet every eye turned to him. Something in his stance, the still calm of a man confronting a warped boundary, made the entire calf seem to hold its breath. He walked to the register. His voice was low and firm, not loud, but it carried farther than any sound. Before I have a question. Travis froze as he held a stack of order tickets. Michael didn't take his eyes off him. Here, who was responsible for assigning shifts and dividing the tips, no one answered right away. Everything seemed to freeze for a second. Then Travis, standing behind the counter sleeves, rolled up the usual smile still on his face, slowly looked up. What's going on? Who are you? Michael didn't respond immediately. Instead, he turned his face slightly to the left, his gaze stopping where Carla was bending down to clean the table in the corner. From that distance, he could see clearly her hand was still shaking.
Slightly.
But not enough to be hidden. Just someone. Michael began, his voice sinking low, almost into the old tiled floor beneath him, who doesn't understand why someone works 6 days a week, opens the restaurant at dawn, and closes it at night. He paused, as if swallowing back something he wasn't ready to say. Then continued, and still comes up $400 short each month just to keep a roof over her head. The sentence dropped like a stone into a still lake. No one laughed. No one moved. A customer in the corner who had been reading the newspaper all morning slowly lowered the page. A newly hired employee behind the pastry counter let go of the tray without realizing it. The air thickened, not because anyone raised their voice, but because the truth was finally being named. Michael slowly turned back to Travis. Do you know the average rent in this area? Travis furrowed his brow. Around $2,000. But I think Michael cut him off, gently motioning toward Carla. Gets paid hourly. And most of those hours are on low-tip shifts. The ones you assign. You think that's a coincidence? Travis opened his mouth to say something, but it was too late. Michael stepped forward. His eyes now left no room for ambiguity. I've spoken to 11 employees in the past 3 hours. 7 said they don't dare ask about tip distribution. 5 said they've never been scheduled for a busy evening shift. 3 said their shift change requests were denied for being inflexible. 2 quit just last month. He paused. His eyes scanned every face in the room. You're the only one here who's been flexible. A soft breeze blew through the door crack, and suddenly, Carla dropped the cleaning cloth. She bent down to pick it up, but this time didn't lower her head. As she looked up, her eyes accidentally met Michael's. And she knew. He knew. A middle-aged customer spoke up, his voice rough. She served me for 3 years. Always polite. I don't believe someone like her is the problem here. Another voice from the table by the door. I've tipped her directly before. Why would they say everything gets pooled? Travis took half a step back, his hand gripping the stack of order tickets. Michael stared directly at him. Why does she have to hide her tips in her apron pocket? Why hasn't her name appeared on the evening shift list for 3 straight months? No one answered. There was nothing more that needed to be said. And the audience, those following through every frame, were no longer just watching. They were there, standing inside that diner, right behind Michael, looking in the same direction, waiting for the same words. And Michael knew the moment had come. He reached into his leather wallet, pulled out a small item, a card. He placed it on the counterfront side facing Travis. Michael Foster. I'm the founder of the New Dawn chain. No background music. No fireworks. Just a heartbeat pounding louder in every stare. Everything after that would never be the same again. The entire diner remained still after the introduction. Michael Foster, founder of New Dawn. No one moved. No one smiled anymore. No more pretending. Travis lifted his hand off the counter as if it had just burned him. His eyes blinked rapidly, but no words came out. A young employee in the corner quietly reached for his phone, then set it down again. No one dared to break the moment. Michael tilted his head toward the shift manager, frozen in place. I need to review last week's security footage. No further questions were needed. An employee rushed into the control room, likely his first time on the shift. He pressed the button without a word. A small screen lit up at the counter. Every eye was locked onto it. On screen, the footage rewound a morning like any other until a customer handed a tip directly to Carla. She smiled, bowed slightly to thank them. But just a few seconds later, Travis appeared, took the cash from her hand, dropped it into a glass jar behind the counter labeled shared. Michael didn't blink. Pause it there. He turned to the staffer operating the system. Show me the shift schedule from the past 3 weeks.
A few clicks, the list appeared.
The weekend evening shifts, the busiest times, were split among 5 employees. Carla's name wasn't one of them. Select Carla, Michael said. Her name popped up. All her shifts were in off-peak hours, 2-4 p.m., 7-10 a.m. midweek, sometimes 5-hour doubles, but never a single evening shift. A soft female voice came from the kitchen. Rosa, the chef, slowly stepped forward. She asked to change shifts. I know. I helped her write the email request, but no one responded. Michael turned to Travis. Did you read that email? Travis fumbled, hand rubbing the back of his neck. I think it might have been missed. I just follow what each location instructed. The tip distribution system was agreed on before. I just know. Michael interrupted. He wasn't harsh, but his voice struck the wooden counter like a soft knock that echoed louder than any argument. There is no policy in my system that allows a manager to decide who gets to pay rent and who doesn't. Travis turned pale. Michael stepped one pace closer, close enough that everyone could hear his breath. You created a shadow system inside a place that was meant to support the people who work hardest. He paused, and his eyes weren't angry. They were worse, disappointed. Carla did everything right. She showed up on time, worked full hours, polite, dedicated. But for the past 3 months, her name hasn't shown up on a single evening shift. Do you know what evening shifts mean to full-time staff? Travis lowered his head. It's how they survive. It's how they make enough to live in a city where rent goes up by 50% each year. Carla, standing near the glass washer, clutched the edge of the tablecloth. Her back had straightened without her realizing, but her eyes were still red. Michael turned to her. I'm sorry. A quiet sentence, but it melted the atmosphere in an instant. I'm sorry the system let this happen. Sorry I didn't hear you sooner. A middle-aged customer at the window seat gently nodded. Rosa quietly wiped her hands on her apron, her eyes glistening. Michael looked around the room. We may not be able to change the cost of rent, but we will not let anyone have to choose between breakfast and keeping their home just because they ended up under the wrong manager. He gave a small nod to the system's supervisor. Starting now, every order will include real-time tip encryption. Everyone gets their share. No one has the right to touch it. He gave one final look at Travis. You're suspended. There will be an official investigation by the oversight board. No need for applause. No one had to speak. But inside everyone something moved. A boundary was redrawn. A drop had been falling long enough to create a wave. No drums. No one fired in the middle of a shift. But every action, every decision was made swiftly, clearly, without spinning in circles. That afternoon, a message from headquarters was sent out. Travis was suspended immediately, and an internal investigation was launched, not only about tip distribution, but the entire scheduling and employee communication system at Golden Fork. Each employee received a direct email from HQ confirming from today all tips would be distributed through the app in real time. Every transaction would be visible, which server, what table, how much tip, no middleman. No one is allowed to hold someone else's money, not even $1. As for Carla, everything changed that very afternoon. She was given a permanent contract. No more 3-month probation or need to remain flexible with your shifts. The lost tips over the past 3 months, after a full review of footage schedules and receipts, were fully reimbursed. Deposited directly into her personal account. Along with it came a special bonus, $1,200. Not a reward for good performance, but housing support compensation, as Michael said, not because she asked, but because she never should have had to go without. On the wall of the calf, just behind the register, a new line was carved into a pale oak plaque. No one who works 8 hours should worry about having a home to return to. It wasn't large. It wasn't showy. But every employee passing by paused to look like a reminder, a quiet promise. That afternoon, the crowd thinned. Shadows stretched across the glass. Michael stood up, walking slowly toward the exit of Golden Fork. But just before pushing open the door, he stopped. At the window seat, Carla was sitting. Not serving. Not counting tips. But eating an employee sandwich, the first meal in weeks she didn't have to skip or rush through in the storage room. In front of her was a glass of water, a blank sheet of paper, a blue ballpoint pen. She was writing something, maybe the application for the night accounting class she once mentioned. The afternoon light touched her cheek, and that smile was real. No walls up, no hesitation. Just a person finally allowed to live by her true worth. Michael watched for a long moment, not to feel proud, but to remember that fairness is not a slogan printed in a company email. It starts with the smallest things: an evening shift, fairly scheduled, a request properly answered, a smile not paid for with sleepless nights and fear of eviction. When he turned to leave, his eyes met Carla's for a brief second. No words were spoken, but something was exchanged. A quiet gratitude, a promise never needing to be written down.